Thank you for being with me today. Much appreciated. Let's start with Karl Bélanger. Karl is the founding president of Traction Strategies. Karl worked for almost 20 years on Parliament Hill under 4 successive NDP leaders. He was notably senior press secretary for Jack Layton and principal secretary for Thomas Mulcair. Karl est aussi un commentateur politique recherché. On peut d'ailleurs l'entendre tous les jours à Cogeco 104.7, une station de radio de la région d'Ottawa et Gatineau. Et Karl est aussi le président de la fondation Douglas Caldwell, une organisme de charité qui est dans la promotion et l'éducation et la recherche dans la social-démocratie au Canada. Warren Kinsella is the president of Daisy Group. Previously, he was a partner at the law firm Macmillan Binch and has also worked as a consultant, journalist, and political chief of staff. Warren received a Bachelor of Journalism honors in Carleton University, and he also has a law degree from the University of Calgary. He also completed executive education course at Harvard. From 1990 to 1993, Warren was a special assistant to the Right Honorable Jean Chrétien. Guys, thank you for being with me today.
Great to be here.
So let me start by maybe the first question is, and maybe I'll start with you, Warren. That crisis changed the world in like so quickly. Within 2-3 weeks, that was a total different government, total different approach. What's your, I would say, what's your take? What's your evaluation of the Trudeau government as of today?
My take is that the Trudeau government has done a pretty good job. And that's not just my view. It's a view that is held by many Canadians. Léger came out with a poll just yesterday showing that the Trudeau government is dramatically ahead of their main opponent, the Conservative Party. The New Democrats have remained more or less stable, but the Tories have really dropped. And it's not just Léger that found that result. It's many other polling agencies have reflected the same thing. Why is that? I think everybody recognizes that the pandemic is an extraordinary event in all of our lifetimes. It's an extraordinary event in history. And it's really an opportunity for politicians and governments to be tested. And we see what they are really like. We see where they shine and where they are lacking. And, you know, Trudeau won a minority government with the smallest share of the popular vote in Canadian history, 33%, just last October. Well, what people have found since the election and since the pandemic, rather, is that while they may not love him, they think that he's done a relatively good job. So too for all of the provincial premiers from Legault in Quebec right across to Oregon and BC. Incumbency used to be a curse. Now it's become a blessing. All of the incumbent governments, in Canada at least, are seen as having done a good job.
So, Karl, maybe you can, that's a good point that Warren made, like about the minority government. I don't feel that it was a big impact on it as of so far. Like, there was no, the parliament's not back. I say, what's your take on that?
Well, I think if the Liberals had had their way, things would have played out differently. But the opposition was not willing to flex their muscles fully. And so you saw a bit of shenanigans at the beginning, and you see the Conservatives kind of having been isolated from the other parties when it comes to try to force the government to go in one direction or another. So it had an impact, but not the impact it should have had the parliament sat properly, had the opposition been able to ask questions and hold the government to account on a daily basis. Obviously, it was not possible. At the same time, the Liberals could not just go and barge ahead and do everything they wanted because there are some legislation required to implement some of the plans that they put in place. And in order to pass them, they need to have at least one of the three major parties on board. And so far, they've been able to do that with the support of usually two parties at least. So there's been very little drama, except at the very beginning when the Liberals kind of blindsided the opposition with an overreach. Some called it a power grab about giving some powers to the Minister of Finance and the government, which was way beyond what was expected by the opposition. But that was solved and people moved on.
Yeah. So again, let's stay on the government response to the crisis. So they spread the money a little bit everywhere. There's a little bit of money for everyone. Warren, do you think that the economic response to the crisis was adequate?
Well, certainly the polling suggests that people do feel that way. But I've certainly spoken to enough liberals, including senior people from previous governments, and they're all saying, at least privately, what conservatives are saying publicly, which is when we get to the other end of this thing, and that could be as much as 3 years away when you talk to some public health experts, the burden that we're going to have on the Treasury, both at the federal level but also at the provincial level, is going to be extraordinary. And obviously, we're going to have to be spending more on public health than we have in the past few years. We're going to have to direct more of our energy to preventing this type of disaster from happening again. So expending is not going to diminish, really. I guess it will in comparison to the pandemic itself. So I think, conservatives are, if you watch what they've been doing throughout the pandemic, they've been trying to get their footing. They've been trying to figure out what to say without sounding too critical. And they've gotten burned a few times on that. I do believe, however, as we get closer to the end of this first wave and maybe the second wave, when they start pointing out that we have to pay for all of these things, I think they're going to have some pickup on that. Equally, for the New Democrats, I think the opportunity for them is saying that clearly the public health response of governments, and particularly the federal government, was wrong, was inadequate. As Dr. Tam herself admitted yesterday, they made mistakes at the outset. Patty Hadju, the Minister of Health, said that the risk to Canadians was very low. She was very complimentary towards the Chinese, and now the international consensus is that China has much to account for. So I think those chickens are going to come home to roost, and that'll have an impact on the Trudeau government's popularity. But as things stand now, guys, if an election were held tomorrow, Justin Trudeau would win one of the biggest majorities in Canadian history.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And Karl, when you know that the health is a totally provincial jurisdiction, and the interaction between the Trudeau government and different provinces, are you seeing that relationship changing over the next few months?
I think you will see the provinces make demands and try to get back the funding that they used to have when it comes to the healthcare system. We already saw some skirmish between Quebec and Ottawa on that point, especially when it comes to long-term care and seniors care. That's going to be key for the next phase. We have to rethink as a country, as a society, the way we care for our seniors and our most vulnerable. And clearly, the model of packing them in some facilities as a big flaw. And we've seen it at play in Quebec, in Ontario, elsewhere in the country, around the world. So long-term care, to me, has to shift to home care and seems to be the next battle between the provinces and the federal government so that they can fund some of these initiatives. The problem, as Warren explained, is that when you're heading for a $300 billion deficit, where are you going to take the money? And the popularity of every government in this country is fairly high, with one or two exceptions. People are rallying behind their governments in a time of crisis. The question is, how long is that going to last? When the crisis is over, and some people start to say, "Well, it was not so bad. Why did we do all these things? It was not necessary, and now we have to pay for it." Those questions will come up hopefully in the longer term rather than the shorter term, because the reality is that without these measures, people would have died. And that's the number one priority of any government, is to protect their citizens.
No, absolutely. And that's a very good point. And let's be like more specific to the construction industry. Like, as you know, we've been impacted quite a lot. Quebec completely shut down the construction industry, province by province. It slowed down a lot. We had to take like drastic measure to protect the health and safety of our workers, their family, and the entire Canadian population. And now we're now thinking about the next step now. And the next step, it's coming with a stimulus package. When we know that there's almost $300 billion deficit this year, how do you see the next step? How do you see that? What kind of stimulus package can help? Warren, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, if you look back, I think one of the best guides and one of the best ways of responding to your question is look at history. The financial crisis of 2008, 2009, one of the critical ways that we got out of that, and, some politicians like Stephen Harper were dragged to reality kicking and screaming, is, President Obama and even Prime Minister Harper realized that we needed stimulus spending. And stimulus spending in those days obviously included the auto industry, because many of them were at risk of collapse. And there was agreement between management and labor on that, but also a huge part in 2008 and 2009 in saving us economically, Western Europe and North America and the globe, was stimulus spending in the construction industry. The building of bridges, the building of roads, the building of critical infrastructure that we needed, whether it was hospitals or schools or government buildings, whatnot. Some conservative politicians like Tim Hudak were critical of that in those days. They were shown to be wrong. Not only did that preserve jobs, but it ensured that we were doing what smart economists say, which is you need to spend when you're facing tough economic times. That's what we did. In Ontario, as of Monday of this week, the labor unions are now able to fully work at construction sites. They had previously, prior to Monday, been able to do work around the province, but there were limitations, and there were a lot of health inspections, as there should be, taking place at some of those construction sites. That has now been lifted. But I believe that the construction industry has been leading the way, because while there's been a lot more inspections by the province of safety, the laborers as well as the contractors have been taking prudent and sensible steps, hand disinfectant at job sites, making sure that human waste is being taken care of in a prompt and reasonable way, maintaining spacing between workers, which the workers know how to do. So I think the construction industry has got a lot of lessons to teach others about how to embrace this new reality, this new normal. And I think that's going to continue to be the case for some time to come.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So that's one thing when we dealt with the federal government, we told them, I said, health and safety of our workers always been the priority for years. For us, it's not a new thing. So we develop our protocol. It's been shared everywhere in Canada now, everyone's using it. It's been mentioned in different government documents. So we're really proud of that. Karl, peut-être on va parler un petit peu du Québec. Le gouvernement Trudeau s'en vient tranquillement avec probablement un package économique qui va relancer l'économie. Mais est-ce que tu penses que le gouvernement Legault, a les moyens de participer à une telle relance? Et deux, quelle va être sa réaction en lien avec ses relations avec le fédéral?
Au niveau de la relation avec le fédéral, présentement, ce qu'on voit, c'est une certaine tension au niveau du système de santé. On l'a vu, l'armée a dû être déployée au Québec, en Ontario aussi, particulièrement dans les centres de soins longue durée. Et Trudeau semblait blâmer le Québec pour ça. Il dit les soldats n'ont pas d'affaire à aller aider nos aînés. Ça devrait être la responsabilité des soins de santé, des services de santé. On a échoué comme société. Le Québec l'a mal pris. Il y a eu une réaction assez vive en disant, si vous n'aviez pas réduit de moitié le financement de la santé, on ne serait pas rendu là. Ça, c'est une chose. Maintenant, quand les gouvernements sont dans une situation où ils vivent une crise économique, ça permet d'évacuer beaucoup de tensions. Parce qu'on a besoin de projets, on a besoin de les approuver, puis on a besoin de les faire commencer. Le programme d'infrastructure du gouvernement libéral qui a été mis en place en 2015 a été très lent à se développer. L'argent était dans le budget, mais ne se rendait pas aux provinces, ne se rendait pas dans les différents projets parce que le temps d'approbation était trop long. Je pense qu'on appelle en anglais le red tape. On va s'en débarrasser un peu pour qu'on puisse faire approuver ces projets-là, pour que l'argent coule et pour qu'on puisse repartir l'économie du bon pied. L'industrie de la construction, c'est une des clés importantes pour faire ça.
Karl, quand on regarde ce qui s'est passé avec la crise, comment pourrais-tu évaluer la performance ou l'impact que le Bloc québécois a eu au niveau de la réponse?
Le Bloc québécois, au début de la crise, lorsqu'il y a eu cet affrontement lors du premier retour de la Chambre, n'avait pas l'air d'être un joueur très actif. Cependant, on soulevait beaucoup de bons dossiers, notamment au niveau des consommateurs, par exemple, vis-à-vis de l'industrie aérienne. Ils font un travail d'opposition plutôt constructif, beaucoup de propositions, des choses très précises. Et on voit là, dans les sondages que le Bloc québécois se maintient bon deuxième au Québec à cause du travail qui a été fait par le Bloc et les députés du Bloc et le chef du Bloc, François Blanchet. Ceci dit, ils se retrouvent dans une situation où on voit les conservateurs et le Bloc québécois dans une espèce de guerre ouverte. On le voit particulièrement sur les médias sociaux. Les députés d'un parti et de l'autre s'attaquent mutuellement. L'un attaquant le Bloc pour être les laquais de Trudeau, l'autre attaquant les conservateurs en disant qu'ils n'étaient pas connectés à la réalité de la crise et des Québécois. Donc, cette bataille-là pour le vote caquiste entre le Bloc et le Parti conservateur est bien amorcée et c'est ce qui sera à surveiller au cours de la prochaine année.
So I'd like to talk about two more topics, if you mind. So first of all, Warren, you spend quite a lot of time out west. You're teaching at the University of Calgary. So you had the feel of the ground. So what's the sentiment over there? Like oil and gas industry have been really affected. They feel still in the crisis. The Trudeau government does not step up to the plate to help them. So what's your take on that?
Well, it is. I lived in Calgary a long time ago during the National Energy Program, and it was pretty bad back then. I was in high school at the time, and you'd look over at the kid who would sit beside you in class, and he was gone. And you'd find out that he and his family had returned to Nova Scotia because they had lost their jobs and they lost their house and they had to leave. So the NEP was a disaster for Alberta and Saskatchewan and for the oil patch, which of course is the dominant industry in those provinces. However, the current situation is worse. With the Trudeaus, with Mr. Trudeau Sr., with Pierre Trudeau, there was, even though they disagreed with him, there was respect for him, for his intellect and his strength. And so even though he didn't agree with Alberta and Premier Lougheed, they considered him to be a serious customer. With his son, with Justin Trudeau, there is a tremendous amount of anger and not just disappointment, but actual betrayal. If you think back to 2013, after Mr. Trudeau announced that he was going to seek the Liberal leadership, after he made his announcement in Papineau, he got on a plane, and the first place he went to was Calgary. And he made a very solemn and serious pledge to Alberta and to the oil patch to ensure that they're never forgotten again and to ensure that they are supported. And that encouraged a lot of people, and it probably didn't hurt the election of Rachel Notley that happened after that. Albertans became prepared to consider a progressive political choice. Well, it hasn't worked out that way. Mr. Trudeau, unfortunately, like so many other things, has tried to be in two different lanes at once, or he's tried to suck and blow at the same time. So while he has pledged his support for the oil patch, he has taken measures or allowed things to happen that have been tremendously damaging to Alberta and Saskatchewan. So I think in that part of the country, it will be a political wasteland for Liberals for a long, long time to come, as with the NEP. What can he do to repair it? I don't know. I think Scott Moe and Jason Kenney just don't trust him. And I've spoken to enough insiders there. They feel the same way. But that was the case with Rachel Notley's government as well. They just don't trust the Trudeau government. And unfortunately, that's not going to be a good thing for national unity. And it's particularly not going to be a good thing as we all try to get out of the pandemic in months and years to come.
Good point. And maybe Karl can add to that. So as we discussed previously, like the future infrastructure program, it's one of the key to like relaunch the economy. Previously, the Trudeau government used the Invest in Canada plan, which the commitment to the $180 billion was a great announcement. We're happy. You mentioned it in French. The program was slow to start. Municipalities were not ready. Provinces were not necessarily ready. The prioritization of project took some time, a lot of red tape. Do you expect the Trudeau government and Minister McKenna, which she mentioned that she's more like flexible and open. It was an article in the paper last week about that. But are you expecting the government to be more flexible in the program that will allow provinces and municipalities to participate to the relaunch?
Oh, I think so. I think we've seen the way they've been operating for the past 2 months. There's lots of flexibility when it comes to the emergency measures. The operative word was get the money out the door, get the money back into the economy, and that will remain the operative word. Now, the question is, will people be there for that? Like we were talking about the oil and gas industry. How will people behave when the economy reopens? Are they going to be willing to go back to work in office space next to each other? Are they going to be willing to use transit as much as they used to? How is telework going to change the reality of many workplaces? That will have an impact on the demand for some sectors. Restaurants, it's a big question mark right now. There's lots of worried people out there. So what happens with that? We've seen the turmoil in the food industry because people's eating habits have changed dramatically. So all these questions cannot be answered by the government. They will be answered by the people and their behavior and their trust that they can go out there and do the things they used to be able to do and stay safe and be safe while doing it. That's the key thing.
Absolutely. And so one last topic I'd like to talk, because I don't think I can leave that call without talking about our friend Donald Trump. I think his reaction, his management of the crisis, we all agree has been terrible. We closed our border. Some would say it took us too much time to close the border. But how do you see? So Warren, how do you see the future of our relationship? And I was at the beginning, I was going to say our relationship, China, U.S., Canada. So all this together, what do you see in the future?
Well, I can tell you, so full disclosure, I'm remotely helping out the Biden campaign, like I helped out the Hillary Clinton campaign. I worked for her in different states. I'm probably not a good person to have around on the campaign because she didn't win. But just a few days ago, I was on a call with Jen O'Malley-Dillon. And Jen O'Malley-Dillon has become the national campaign manager for the Biden campaign, replacing a guy from Pennsylvania named Greg Schultz, who obviously did a great job during the primaries, but they needed somebody with presidential experience, and Jen has got that. So I was on a conference call with her, as well as Simone Sanders, who has been at the forefront of the Biden campaign. So what I'll tell you, to answer your question, is I'll tell you what Jen had to say, and I took notes, is, Biden right now is about 10 points ahead of Trump, including in those battleground states where Trump won. Trump won the presidency on the basis of about 70,000 votes in 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Biden is ahead in all of those. He's got the most formative lead of any challenger presumptive presidential candidate in recent U.S. history. But what Jen said to us on the call was that is not going to hold. That is not going to last. They believe that Trump is going to move up, and they're taking him very seriously. One of the ways that they intend to prosecute their campaign is not just depend upon those traditional pillars of a progressive political campaign that Karl and I are familiar with, which is women, young people, and newcomers. They also intend to reach out to the so-called white working class. They feel that that's one of Biden's key strengths is, growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then moving to Delaware when he was a kid because they were poor. He was the poorest senator when he was elected for the first time many years ago to the U.S. Senate. They feel that he connects with the white working class in a way that Hillary Clinton obviously did not. So I think that, at the outset, I said every incumbent government in Canada, whether they're New Democrats, Conservatives, or Liberals, they're all doing well. There's one incumbent government in the world that's really doing badly, and that's Donald Trump. 95,000 dead as of this morning in the United States of America, killed by a virus that this man said would disappear like a miracle. And I think there's going to be an accounting for that, and Biden is the beneficiary of that. The challenge for Biden, because I believe he will be president, is to ensure that he does what Obama did. Obama came in after the global economic crisis and was faced with all kinds of financial challenges. Biden, it's going to be even worse. He is going to have the shortest honeymoon of any president I can think of because it's going to be very, very tough for him. But I do believe he's going to win. And I believe Donald Trump, who I can't use the language I'd like to describe him, is going to lose. And we're going to regain some sanity in our neighbor to the south.
Karl, maybe maybe you could add to that, but just like we close our border, Biden mentioned that he would cancel the Keystone project pipeline, all the management of the crisis, 2 different levels, Canada, U.S. What's the effect on that? What's the long-term effect on the trade?
Well, obviously, central trade has continued during this crisis, but the normal trade, the tourism, all the other industries that rely on the border being open, have been hugely impacted. But when it comes to the political relationship, the key thing will be one of tone, because you will have disagreements about this project or this approach, but you never know what you're going to get from Donald Trump. I mean, he says things. Who knows where he got that? The virus was a Democrat hoax at some point, he said. I mean, that's the kind of thing he did. And Warren was right. The Trump government is one of the only governments in the world which popularity did not rise during this crisis. And it's precisely because of this tone-deaf approach he had from the beginning. He was not faster or slower than the other governments in terms of the action on the ground. All governments were slow with a few exceptions. Taiwan, New Zealand, here in Canada, New Brunswick, and maybe even BC comes to mind. But every government was slow off the mark. Every government was learning and making decisions, maybe late in many cases, and that has cost lives. But there's a tone to it all. There's a compassion that needs to come in, and that's what you've seen from certainly from the Trudeau government, from other government provincially, and that's not what you're seeing from the Trump government. You're seeing the blame game. Now, there will be a time for the blame game. And the time of reckoning, of course, will happen at the election. But Trump, proved people wrong before. He can do it again. One of the key things for Joe Biden, I think, is that white, middle-class, angry vote. And I'll be curious to see how he will use Bernie Sanders, who's now fully endorsing Biden, unlike what he did with Clinton back in the day, because Bernie Sanders was able to tap in that white, angry vote of the middle class in the suburbs. And so he could be very useful for Biden's campaign in defeating Trump.
Yeah, it's good. Excellent point. Guys, Justin Trudeau is 11 point ahead in the poll. Minority government. When's the next election? Warren.
Well, I mean, the British parliamentary tradition to which we occasionally subscribe is you're not allowed to, or it's frowned upon having an election when your opponents are in the middle of a leadership race, as the Conservatives are. But I'll tell you, Mr. Trudeau sure must be tempted because he has dramatically grown from the election result in October, and the Conservatives have dramatically dropped. The New Democrats, as I pointed out earlier, are doing fine. They're holding on to their traditional support, and in what must be very difficult circumstances for them. But I honestly think that there would be a backlash against Mr. Trudeau. Forget about being mean to the Conservatives. If he was seen as trying to take advantage of the pandemic, and have an election now, I think people would be very, very angry with him. I think he needs to wait until life gets a little bit normal, and I suspect that his popularity will go down a little bit, and the opposition's will go up a little bit. So not just yet.
Forcing people to line up for hours while the virus is out there would be a huge mistake and would backfire on Trudeau right now. But what's to say how it's going to be in the fall when the Conservatives have a leader and both, the main leadership contenders have been kind of tone deaf during this crisis, in my opinion. They've said things that sounded more Trump-like than what you would expect from a prime minister in waiting wannabe. So there's an opportunity for Trudeau, and no question about it. But that window will close soon. So can he ask the people in the fall for a clear mandate to recover from the crisis, can't have the instability of the government? There's a narrative that can be built, but it's very dangerous to provoke an election when you have three opposition parties, and right now, except maybe for Peter MacKay, nobody seems to be eager to bring down the federal government, the Liberal government. So it's in the hands of Justin Trudeau. It will be tempting, but I think he will resist the temptation, and we'll have to wait at least another year.
Gentlemen, Warren, Karl, thank you very much. We did that last year at the conference. Hopefully, if life go back to normal, I'll have to have you back next year for our conference. Thank you very much for your time. Always appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Merci.
Welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.